Salvete omnes, this is Emilia, also known as the Martian Geek, and it's time for me to discuss the game. 22 videos, 8 months, 77 levels, 9 worlds, 19 bosses, and we're done. You know, I've been reading Magnus Chase lately, and the 9 worlds of Norse myth are certainly much different from the 9 worlds here. World 3 would be the most Viking-like, maybe it could be Isaheim or something? World 9 could be Bifrost, though that's more of a bridge between worlds than a world itself. I wonder what the Old Norse for bleeping checkpoint starvation is. Anyway, New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It's decent enough. It seems to be the fan favorite of the New Super Mario Bros. Series, but honestly, I'd be hard-pressed to rank it, the original, and 2, and it might be worth going back and playing those again, just as long as we all agree that the Wii U one was the best. If you're looking for a 2D Mario game on a console and you don't have a Super Nintendo, you poor person, you could do a lot worse than this game. I will say, though, that it's another of those games that I remembered being better than it was. It's fine, but it doesn't really feel exciting anymore, nor does most of it feel all that challenging, except when it's a challenge for the wrong reasons. I think part of that is having to design every level with the fact in mind that there might be 4 people playing it. Everything has to be a lot more open and have much more empty space, and you can't have as much careful platforming. The DS game didn't have that restriction, and I can think of a few levels that don't seem like they'd work with 4 players anyway. Also, the physics feel kind of off. It's hard to explain it exactly, but it's like they're heavy and slippery at the same time, kind of. They're better than they were in the original Super Mario Bros. And about equal to Super Mario Bros. 3's, but they're definitely not as good as Super Mario World's. For as much as I complain about the code in that game, I have to admit that the physics were pretty darn good overall. Even a broken clock is right twice a day, I guess. Around the time I was uploading The Last of World 7, I finally put my finger on one possible reason why this game feels bland. It has a lot of levels that focus on one thing, which isn't a deal breaker in itself, given that Donkey Kong Country often does the same thing, but a lot of the time it feels like this game doesn't really do much with its gimmicks, it doesn't develop them. There's a structure called Kishotenketsu that's used in a lot of Japanese games and other media, and it has 4 parts to it: introduction, development, twist, and conclusion. Kishotenketsu. One of the easiest to see examples of this that I've come across is Haunted Hall from Donkey Kong Country 2. It has a clear theme throughout, the time barrels, and it develops them as you progress through the level. The first part of the level introduces the gimmick with a fairly lenient setup. The second part develops it and gives you a harder challenge with more barrels. The third part puts a twist on it by making you have to avoid the barrels instead of collecting them. And the fourth part concludes it by having both the plus and minus barrels and making you have to think more about how, where, and when to jump. So what does all this have to do with New Super Mario Bros. Wii? Well, from what I've heard, Kishotenketsu design is something that Nintendo commonly uses in their games, but I feel like most of this game's developers might have missed the memo. It's rare to see a level in this game that actually uses all 4 parts. Usually, you just get the key and the show, and sometimes not even both of those. Take 5-5, for instance. It has a clear gimmick, the flying manta rays, but every part of the level feels pretty much the same as every other part of the level. They don't introduce ones later on that move faster or in different patterns, or that are smaller, or carrying enemies, or anything like that. If I showed you a screenshot from Haunted Hall that had a few minus barrels in it and a timer of 25 seconds, you might think, oh, you're about 60% of the way through. If I showed you a screenshot from 5.5 that just had a few manta rays and some sky, chances are you'd have no idea where in the level I was unless you guessed based on the timer. It would be easier than that scene in that one Daffy Duck cartoon where he tries to get Porky Pig to guess what opera a song is from by playing one note of it, but that's about it. There are also occasionally gimmicks that are oddly underused, like the big rotating shapes in the World 3 tower. There are 2 of them at the beginning of the level, 1 in a bonus room, and 2 at the end. They never appear anywhere else in that level or any other, and the rest of the level has absolutely nothing to do with them. This is all compounded by the fact that it seems like a lot of the levels in this game are just not paced well. It feels like at least 2 levels per world mostly involve waiting around for stuff. Well, that's not to say that that never happened in the classic Mario games. The second room of Valley of Bowser 2 comes to mind. I swear it happens way more often in this game. And how many levels based around riding on a single slow-moving platform did we need, Nintendo? Goodness. Overall, while this game has very few outright bad levels, it doesn't have many noticeably good ones either. And with the hardware that the Wii offers, they could have done a lot more. So overall, while this game is decent, it feels very safe. It's really not pushing the envelope at all. That envelope is stationary. That said, I'd still take this style of Super Mario Bros. Game over none at all, which is what I've had lately. I did finally get my wish at the Nintendo Direct when they announced Super Mario Bros. Wonder, but geez, that's still almost 11 freaking years since the last 2D Mario game. Heck, the last new Mario platformer of any kind was 6 years ago. Do ROM hackers have to pick up all the slack? Also, the soundtrack is incredibly lazy. That's true of all the new Super Mario Bros. Games except the first, New Super Mario Bros. 2 being the worst example, and even the original still reused the Super Mario Bros. 1 underground theme. In this game, though, the main theme is a remix of the one in the DS game, the athletic and snow themes are both remixes of the main theme, the mountain and sewer levels don't even get their own music, and there are only 12 unique level tracks total. While that is an improvement over the first few Mario games, particularly Super Mario Bros. 2, keep in mind that it's only half again as many as the original Mega Man, which only had 10 levels total and came out in 1987, while this game has 77 levels and came out in 2009. In fact, it's equal to the number in Mega Man 4, which came out in 1992, and neither of those games felt the need to arrange the same basic track for 3 different level themes on multiple occasions. If the people who made New Super Mario Bros. Made Mega Man, then every Mega Man game would have a level that played an arrangement of Gutsman stage music, and 2 or 3 of the other Robot Master stages would have slightly different variants of the same music. And another thing, not counting World 9, why are there only 2 secret levels in the entire game? It sure makes a lot of those secret exits feel pointless if you're playing all the levels anyway. Anyway, let's finish up by discussing some favorites and least favorites. I think my least favorite boss is probably Wendy, just because being underwater decreases your mobility substantially, and it's kind of annoying to dodge her and her projectiles when you're busy swimming slowly. Though pretty much all the Koopalings suffer somewhat from Toadman syndrome. After the first hit, you can pretty much follow them while they're in their shell and then bop them again as soon as they come out of it. It's probably the most embarrassing for Roy. He's a World 6 boss and his gimmick does almost nothing. Iggy notably doesn't have that problem, and his fight is one of the more interesting ones. My favorite boss is, honestly, all the fights with Bowser Jr. He's an annoying little brat of a character, but I have to admit that his boss battles generally feel much more interesting than the Koopalings. Out of just the Koopalings, I'm not sure. Maybe Iggy? He's kind of annoying to hit, but like I said, his fight is at least mechanically interesting. My least favorite world is definitely World 9, but if we only count the ones that have checkpoints, I'm not sure. Maybe 2 or 4. Speaking purely objectively, World 1 would have to be my favorite just because it has the fewest bad levels, but I think World 7 might have the most good ones. My favorite music track is none of them. The soundtracks in these games suck. Okay, the beach and castle themes are pretty good, and this is the first game that used them. Least favorite is unquestionably the underground theme because it is overused to the point of parody, and it's really sad that Nintendo can't come up with any new music for underground levels. Even Super Mario 3D World recycled it, which is shocking for a game that otherwise had an excellent soundtrack. None of the graphics stand out as being especially good or bad. Now let's discuss my top 10 favorite and least favorite levels. It's worth mentioning that most of the ones in the least favorite list aren't really that bad. Most of them are just forgettable, slow, or boring. There is only one level that stood out as being truly horrible. I really hope I don't have to spell out which one that was, but we'll discuss it soon enough anyway. I also have some honorable mentions for both lists, ones that I felt worthy of saying something about even if they weren't good or bad enough to be in the top 10, or bottom 10 as it were. So, without further ado, here are some levels that weren't the worst, but definitely could have been better. 2-6. As I mentioned, there seem to be an awful lot of levels that involve just riding on one platform. This is probably one of the better ones, and it being on the Wii allows for a rotating cube that would be very tricky to do effectively on the Super Nintendo, but it's still not my favorite style of athletic level. 2 Castle. This is kind of an odd case. I actually thought it was kind of neat that they brought back the Maze Castle gimmick from the original Super Mario Bros. The problem is that that's all this level has going for it. It is extremely short if you know where you're going, and even if you don't, it's still pretty trivial to get through. 3-3. I guess there's nothing inherently wrong with this level, but I remember it not being especially fun when I played it. It doesn't help that it's a fairly long level, so that stupid underground theme remix can loop about 10 times even if you finish it on your first try, which you probably won't. At least it's fairly unique. 3-5. Basically, take 2-6 and rotate it 90 degrees, and you get 3-5. I somewhat question why they needed both of these levels, especially so close to each other, but what I really question is why both of them needed secret exits. By the time you're playing through the second half of 3-5, you're probably sick of the gimmick. 4-2. Bland, very linear, the parts with the thin platform slow Mario's pace to a crawl, and you have to deal with random cheap-cheeps that can sometimes just spawn randomly right in your way and hit you before you can even react to it, including right before the goal, as we saw in the Let's Play. 4 Ghost House. It's not the most offensive level out there, but basically its entire gimmick is just those moving foreground platforms, and they move slowly. The level would be pretty short if you didn't spend so much of it just waiting. 5-5. The fact that I use this as the example for bland level design in this game should tell you something. It's an auto-scroller that basically has the flying manta rays, a few bullet bills, some items, and nothing else. 6-2. There's nothing really wrong with this one either, it's just extremely uninteresting. It's the only underground level with the rolling terrain, but it doesn't do terribly much with it. It's probably one of the most forgettable levels in the game, but I guess the fact that I remembered it well enough that it stood out for being forgettable actually makes it not forgettable? There's your paradox for the day. 7 Tower. Most of the levels in World 7 are quite decent, either by having good platforming or a unique gimmick. This one, though, basically just yet another elevator tower, this time with pointless motion controls and more enemy spam. It does keep you on your toes more than the other levels of its kind, but it still kind of gives me the feeling that we have, in fact, been there and done that. Also, the secret exit is almost completely unmarked, and it's no wonder that I didn't find it on my own. 8-1. The problem with this level is that it uses 3 particular things that do not mix very well. There's the constantly advancing toxic smoke, so you have to try to hurry through, the lava geysers, which block your path and force you to wait, yet again, and thereby make you unable to hurry, and the falling rocks, which are random and can either be a non-issue or get right in your way when you're trying to deal with the other things. If you're stuck between 2 of the geysers in a space that's only 2 or 3 blocks wide, and one of the lava rocks comes right down into that space, you get to eat crap. Maybe they should have turned those off during certain sections or prevented them from spawning at certain positions. 8-5, also known as Single Moving Platform Level Variant 63B. While I remembered the level being worse than it actually ended up being during the Let's Play, it still doesn't exactly make the list of most creative or fun levels. 8-6. I just don't really like Rising Hazard levels, and it seems like every lava world has to have one. And aside from having the helicopter suit, this one doesn't do anything special. If it used those club-shaped platforms more, it could be more interesting. But as it is, it just feels like another thing that we've seen before that wasn't that great in the first place. 8 Castle. Another case of a level that doesn't have anything inherently wrong about it, but falls short of its potential. Heck, I could make an entirely separate top 10 list of levels that weren't bad, but gave me the feeling that they could have done a lot more with them. This is Bowser's Castle, the last level in the game before the credits, the one where you face the final boss. It should feel cool, climactic, and unique. And this level doesn't really give any of those impressions. It feels like a completely generic castle level. It does have the downward vertical part, but that wasn't that special. And the final battle was interesting, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the level should suffer for it. And now, my picks for the top 10 worst levels in the game. Number 10, 5-2. This one has a decent idea. Big wigglers that you can bounce on or have to maneuver around while avoiding swoopers and poison. But once you step back and look at the actual level design, what you see is a big wad of nothing. The level is pretty short and easy, and it doesn't really do anything interesting once you get over the initial excitement of, wow, giant bouncy wigglers. The sad thing is, this is the only level in the game where wigglers of any kind appear. They got done dirty. Number 9, 6 Tower. This is one of those levels that makes me feel like they should have just done fortresses instead of towers, since the latter always have to be vertically oriented. Meanwhile, there's nothing preventing at least parts of castles and fortresses from being vertical if necessary. Super Mario World did it, after all. They're just not limited to that configuration. There are only so many worthwhile designs you can do for an entirely vertical castle-themed level, and I feel like they ran out of good ideas quite early in this game, maybe even the DS game. So as a result, we get things like the World 3 Tower and this. Those supersized skewers may look intimidating, but they're basically the only noteworthy feature the level has. And the problem with having 1 or 2 giant spikes instead of a bunch of smaller ones is that you have to wait for a long time for it to get out of your way. Feels like this level has more waiting than it does platforming. Number 8, 3 Tower. The main problem with this one comes down to that second elevator section. It's slow and not especially interesting. And while it does gradually ramp up in difficulty, it's basically just the 2D platformer equivalent of a game of jump rope. But what takes the level from dull but inoffensive to straight up annoying is that second star coin. It is way too easy to screw yourself out of that one by accidentally killing the spike balls with the POW, and you only get 1 shot at it. If you mess it up, you have to die and do that entire slow elevator section all over again. Those big spinning shapes weren't a bad idea. Why didn't the level focus more on those? Number 7, 5-4. I think this was actually the first level of its kind in the series, not counting the Dory level in the original, and its kind is a boat ride that could politely be described as leisurely. It's another level that would be very short if it weren't padded out by the forced pace, and having to clean enemies off your boat is not as interesting a concept as Nintendo thinks it is, especially when some of them can just drop right on top of you with no warning. You can also pal the second star coin right into the drink if you're not careful or didn't know ahead of time when you need to use it. As a new gimmick, it's not the worst, but it does make me question why Nintendo felt it necessary to revisit it in New Super Mario Bros. U. Number 6. 7-6. I mentioned earlier that quite a few levels feel like they don't develop their gimmicks enough, and this is probably one of the worst examples of that, along with 5-5, which narrowly avoided making it onto this list itself. You jump on parabeetles, and then you jump on some more parabeetles, and then you jump on some more parabeetles, I guess. The Super Mario Bros. 3 version wasn't much better, but at least that one was short and not a secret level. This does have significantly trickier and more interesting platforming than most similar levels, but any goodwill that may have created is negated by it being auto-scrolling, meaning your pace is forced once again, and having no checkpoint, meaning that if you die late in the level it will take you a while to get back there. Out of the two truly secret levels in the game, it definitely feels like less of a reward than 8-7 does. Number 5. 6-6. Most of the single platform ride levels landed on this list or the honorable mentions, but out of all the variants in this game, this is probably the worst of them. Slow, check. Easily missable collectibles, check. Pointless motion control gimmick, check. Music wearing out its welcome easily, check. Secret exit at the end so you have to play through 97% of the level twice? Yeah, putting it all in the dark makes it marginally more interesting thematically, but it doesn't help it be any more fun. Pink Kitty Rose was the first person whom I recall pointing out how boring this level is, and funnily enough, that conversation in her Let's Play of Super Mario Sunshine about boats being satanic could also apply to this game. Number 4. 2-4. The first level that really made me think, dang, this is annoying. Wind gimmicks are tricky to do right. I don't recall anyone singing the praises of Gusty Glade or the Sandstorms and Commando Man stage, and even those at least had a few parts where you could just ride the wind and get huge jump distance. This level doesn't really even have that. Strangely enough, I think the Lost Levels actually made the best use of its wind of any game I could think of that had it. Aside from a couple secrets, which are mostly just frustrating because of the precision required, the main thing you do with the wind is just wait, again, for it to stop. Also, it's another level with the secret exit at the end, and this one is not terribly intuitive and requires a specific power-up, so boo to this one. Number 3. 8-4. Dark levels are hard to design well, water levels are hard to design well. So if you want to make a dark water level, you'd better be really sure that you know what you're doing, and if you ask me, the designers of 8-4 did not. It's hard to see obstacles or avoid them, given that Mario's maneuverability underwater is not great, and yet at the same time it doesn't feel very exciting or challenging in a good way, and that last power-up placement is just rude. It does have a few exclusive enemies and that part with the star, but they're not enough to carry what is overall just kind of an annoying and not very fun level. Number 2. 9-4. Okay, I'll admit this one is not nearly as bad as I remember it being. I mean, it's another auto-scrolling level with no midway point, which pretty well eliminates the possibility of it being anywhere near good. But the real problem with this one is the star coins. Sure, the star coins in World 9 serve no purpose, so they're easily skippable, but I don't know, they put collectibles there so I feel like I have to get them. And in this one, they are all placed kind of off the beaten path. The second one requires throwing something at a fairly specific angle, which you only get a few chances at before you can no longer get it, and the third one requires keeping an ice flower all the way to the end. I mean, it could be worse. It could be like 5-4 in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, where the power-up you need is right at the beginning and only at the beginning, whereas this one does give you a couple further into the level. But still, you have to be aggressive enough to get rid of the bob-ombs that you're being assaulted with, but not to the point of killing the piranha plant that you need to freeze, and if you accidentally kill it or lose your power-up, you do the whole darn level over again. You know, Super Mario Bros. 3 had a fair number of auto-scrolling levels, being the first game in the series to have them, and none of the levels in that game had checkpoints, but they were short. This game might have fewer, but boy do I feel like a lot of the ones that it does have like to waste your time. Number 1. 9-7. I'm going with popular opinion here because this seems to be pretty much unanimously considered the worst level in the game, and it deserves its reputation. It's actually fairly short, but don't let that give you a false sense of security. Just the start of the level is already annoying, with Venus fire traps spam the likes of which you've never seen before. It reminds me of 7-8 from Super Mario Bros. 3, but worse because this level also has ice physics, and of course being on a much more powerful console it doesn't have nearly the sprite limitations. There are no penguin suits here, so it's very easy to just slide right into a fireball or a newly thawed muncher, and there are parts where you can't make the jumps that you need to if too much of the ground has been turned into munchers. Then you get a breather with the chestnut Goomba section, and then you get to finish up with the worst part of the whole level. If you want the second star coin, you need to wait around for ages getting the plants underneath to melt the ice above it. You could use the nearby fire flower, of course, but that's risky because it can easily melt platforms that you don't want melted, especially in conjunction with the obstacle immediately following it, the group of 5 upside-down Venus fire traps. I think the way that you're supposed to get past them is to let them each melt 1 block, then quickly run over the single-tiled wide gaps before they come out again, but if anything times out the wrong way there, then you just flat-out can't beat the level, which I don't think any other level in the game does. And then after that, you're still not out of the woods, because there's a 3rd star coin to get, and again, you need to make sure that the right ice blocks get melted and the wrong ones don't. It would be easier with the fire flower, but good luck keeping one this far into the level. So you have to hope that the fire bro gets rid of the blocks on the top while leaving the ones on the sides alone. The further you get from that ideal, the more likely you are to miss the wall jump for the coin and plummet into oblivion, which is really frustrating after getting so close to the end and making it through all the other crap that the level throws at you. I know it's an unlockable difficult bonus level, but good lord! Most of the rest of World 9, despite its flaws, was challenging in a reasonable way, whereas the only part of this level that I would consider reasonable is the Chestnut Goomba area. Pretty much everything else is just obnoxious! Now to talk about something better. These honorable mentions aren't among the best levels in the game, but they were still noteworthy. 1-1. It's fairly simple, but as a first level, I think it does a pretty good job of showcasing some of the new mechanics. It gives you the propeller suit, and it uses the rolling hills. It's a good introduction to the game. 1-3. This one deserves a mention because it introduces Yoshi. All of the Yoshi levels are at least decent, even if they don't always have that much substance or challenge, but this one is notable because you can even eat things like fireballs and hammers. While the Hammer Bros are way too hard for World 1 if you don't have Yoshi, it's pretty satisfying to just spit their projectiles right back at them. 2-5. It's another Yoshi level. This one is basically a big power trip where you can just eat a bunch of Pokies and get power-ups forever, not to mention make a snack out of the Lakitu before it can do much. On a side note, I still find it odd that the Pokies turn into fruit. 3-1. Penguins. The penguin suit was an interesting idea for a power-up, and this level lets you do plenty of fun things with it. 4-3. The only level with Hucket Crabs is also a nice beach level with some platforming and much less slow swimming like 4-1 had. It's a shame that it's so short, especially if you run through half the level with the star. 4-5. Of all the rompy levels in this game, this is probably the rompiest. You get Yoshi again, a friendly Lakitu for some extra coins, and not much in the way of difficulty. This level might actually be easier than 1-1, which is kind of silly. Seems like even Nintendo doesn't always know what to do with the beach theme. 4 Airship. All of the airship levels in this game are good, but I only picked one for the top 10, and it was tough to decide. They definitely go for nostalgia, with some Super Mario Bros. 3 and even Super Mario World mechanics. Was this game the first to put Mecha Koopas on airships? Because it seems like such a good fit in retrospect. 5 Ghost House. The concept is interesting, with the hub area and then a bunch of separate rooms. I'm surprised that such a thing doesn't get used for more ghost houses, really. I think the main issue with this one is that once you've gotten all the star coins and know where you're going, you can run through the level in 15 seconds flat. 6-3. The one and only sewer level. It also has a unique gimmick in the form of those rising and lowering pot-shaped platforms. While it doesn't feel worthy of the top 10 because there's not all that much to the level overall, I thought it at least deserved a mention due to its unique theme. I have a bit of a soft spot for levels with one-off themes. For instance, Slip Slide Ride was one of the most memorable levels in Donkey Kong Country. Sadly, this one doesn't have its own music, unlike that one, but I suppose that is to be expected. 6 Airship. Basically, copy-paste what I said about the World 4 Airship. This probably felt the most traditional of the three, with the auto-scrolling and rocky wrenches and stuff. 7-2. The Floating Bubble level. This is yet another one of those neat gimmicks, shame they didn't do much with it, levels. The chain chomps are also there, I guess. I wonder how hard it would be to do the bubbles in Super Mario World. 7 Castle. This is easily the best use of the big spikes. It doesn't quite make the top 10 because it's a bit one-note and still requires a good amount of waiting. In particular, the bigger spikes move at least twice as far as they strictly need to. But it's still decent overall. And Ludwig is a perfectly fine boss, though I never did decide if I should count bosses for these. Finally, here are what I thought were the top 10 best levels in the game. The lack of checkpoints precludes any World 9 levels from being among the best, though a couple of them would be pretty decent if they didn't have that problem. In particular, 9.6 might have made it if not for that. Anyway, number 10, 8 Airship. All of the airship levels were good, but I didn't feel the need to put all 3 of them on here, and this was probably my favorite of the 3, though I couldn't tell you exactly why. Hey, I had to make a decision. Number 9, 8-7. The Bone Coaster was pretty fun. Admittedly, it is another level that only really does one thing, but the difference is, this time it's fast. This level put all of its eggs in one basket, and that basket is going 100 miles per hour. Actually, I guess if a basket of eggs were moving that fast, the eggs would probably break. I may have gotten a bit carried away with the metaphor here. The fast pace also means that it's not too much of a problem if you die, since you'll be able to get back to where you were pretty quickly, which certain other levels could benefit from 7.6. Even if you're not using it as a shortcut, I'd say this level is a worthy secret. Number 8, 1.6. It's simple, but I think it's fairly well designed. It focuses more on the rolling hills, and it actually varies up their speeds, sizes, the obstacles around them, and whatnot. Number 7, 1 Castle. The focus of this one is those big gears, and I think it does a pretty good job with it. It may be more difficult than a lot of first castles, but it was a decent gimmick and a good showcase of the Wii's abilities. Number 6, 3-4. This one gets hate sometimes, but I think it's a pretty decent platforming-focused level. Admittedly, the ice physics do make it even more treacherous than it would already be with the fast-moving blocks, but I feel like it's still a good challenge. The thing they did with the red switch is certainly weird, but it was kind of an interesting idea. Number 5, 5-3, the Bramball level. This one takes one enemy type and uses it in quite a variety of situations. It also isn't completely bound to having just the Bramballs, it incorporates other elements as well, such as the bouncing Koopas, the rolling logs, and even some light puzzle solving. It's nothing special really, but what it does a pretty decent job with. Number 4, 7-4. The unique platform type in this one mostly doesn't provide that many opportunities for doing cool things, since most of the time you can pretty much just keep it to one side until you need to get to the other one, but it's still a pretty decent athletic level, with a good amount of variety as well. Number 3, 6-4. Easily the best Yoshi level in the game. It feels like the only one that isn't just a big power trip, and while those can also be fun, this one actually provides a little bit of platforming challenge, especially in that last part with the star coin, where you actually have to plan things out. Number 2, 7-3. This level does nothing fancy. It doesn't really even do anything that couldn't be done in a Super Mario World level. It's probably one of the most classic-styled levels in the game. But what it does do is have themes and gimmicks that are actually developed and combined in interesting ways, varying up the level design without it feeling out of place or too easy or difficult. Imagine if they'd done this kind of quality design with the Wii exclusive elements, what a game this would be. Number 1, 6 Castle. This one has a lot of good things going for it. It starts out by introducing those tilting platforms, giving the platforming a new angle, literally. Then it adds the rolling spike balls to make things trickier. Then it has the spike balls constantly spawn and drop from above. Then finally, it brings things full circle by using the tilting platforms again. In other words, it actually feels like it follows the Kisho Tenketsu design that I mentioned earlier. It's also one of the more challenging levels in the game, but it never feels unfair or cheap like some of them do, 9.7. I'll admit that the boss is pretty pathetic, as mentioned, but I won't hold that against it. In short, the World 6 Castle is, in my opinion, the best level in New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Every level ending in 4 except 2 was either on the best list or the worst, and both of the remaining 2 were water levels. What a coincidence. Anyway, don't put too much stock in these lists, because a lot of them were hard to rank, and it's often difficult to explain why I dislike something, or even more so why I like something. And of course, it's all my personal opinion. In any case, that is everything I have to say about New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It could be better, but it's still a good game, and I enjoyed playing through it again. See you next project!